afternoon, everyone. Virgo here. It's May 23rd, 2019, and this video is something that a lot of you have requested over the last several months and have been waiting for a while. I'm going to be going over today what the difference is between the real Moor people, those that are actually from Morocco, and what those people bring when they come to the United States. And I'm going to be going over the African American Moors that are part of the Moorish Science Temple cult following by Noble Drew Ali, prophetic supposed teachings. There's a huge, huge difference. And that's what we're going to be going over today. I have a treat of a friend of mine who actually wrote an article. He's an American Indian from the state of Washington, and he's a professor. And he teaches American Indian reservation law, and he teaches American Indian history. So I got it from the horse's mouth on why it is that Indian reservations have certain sovereignties that a lot of other groups are looking to try to implement, but really don't have the right to. First, let's go over who the Moor people actually are. Moor, in English usage, a Moroccan or formerly a member of the Muslim population of what is now Spain and Portugal, of mixed Arab, Spanish, and Berber origins. Okay, so who the Moors are they actually people that are from this region. They have to have some form of actual heritage from there, meaning that, you don't just get to claim that because you're black, you're a Moor. Moors come in all kinds of colors, but the majority of them look very similar in skin color to an American Indian. This is the reason why they're classified through the health department as an Indian, because that is very similar to what the actual skin color looks like, and the origins suggest that they are a form of Indian. The Moors created the Arab Andalusian civilization and subsequently settled as refugees in North Africa between the 11th and the 17th centuries, by extension corresponding to the Spanish Moro. The term occasionally denotes any Muslim in general, as in the case of the Moors of Sri Lanka or the Philippines. This particular article is in the Encyclopedia Britannica. You can find it by going to britannica.com/moorpeople, and it will give you all of the history on the actual Moors. What we are dealing with in terms of people that are filing false liens against people and following the sovereign citizen movement type of jargon are people that follow a specific cult prophet's ideology. His name was Noble Drew Ali. This following information is all on Noble Drew Ali, which is important because this explains who the religious leader is that the people that you see on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, etc., are talking about when they talk about the prophet Noble Drew Ali. This is part of a religious cult. This is not the same as the people who are the Moor people that are actually from Morocco. Noble Drew Ali was the founder and prophet of the Moorish Science Temple of America, the first mass religious community in the history of American Islam, and the black nationalist model for the Nation of Islam. He was born Timothy Drew on January 8, 1886, to parents who were ex-slaves in North Carolina. You might find that this is particularly interesting due to the fact that we have a large amount of the population of quote-unquote Moors online who claim that slavery never even happened. His earliest followers believe that he was an orphan for most of his childhood and was raised by the Cherokee Indians. After several years as a merchant seaman, he established the Canaanite Temple, the first Moorish American community, in Newark, New Jersey in 1913, and in the 1920s he renamed his community several times as the Moorish Holy Temple of Science, the Moorish Science Temple of America, and the Moorish Divine and National Movement of North America Incorporated, and founded new temples in several Midwestern and Southern cities. The Moorish American community grew to approximately 30,000 members and was the largest Islamic community in the United States before the Nation of Islam came about in the 1950s. Inspired by the political and cultural creativity of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association in the Great Migration of Black Southerners to the northern cities, Noble Drew Ali set up his headquarters in Chicago in 1923 and claimed to be the second prophet of Islam. His esoteric spiritual philosophy was constructed from Islamic, Christian, and Freemasonic sources. Ironic, isn't it? The Moorish Americans wore turbans and fezzes. They replaced their surnames from slavery with El or Bey. Now, those same El and Bey are claiming, several of them, are claiming that slavery never even existed. They created their own nationality cards and flag, and they called themselves olive skins Asiatics, descendants of Morocco instead of Negroes or colored people. In 1927, Ali wrote their sacred text, the Holy Quran of Moorish Science Temple, also called the Circle 7 Quran, to teach his followers and their pre-slavery religion, nationality, and genealogy. To support his case for a Moorish American identity, he emphasized two important points. First, Black Americans were really Asiatics, the descendants of Jesus, and second, the destiny of Western civilization was linked to the rise of the Asiatic nations, Asians, Africans, Native Americans, and African Americans. I'm not going to go any further with this. I'm going to link it to the description along with all of the other sources that I will be using for this video. All right, I'm not going to be reading this article, although I will link it to the description of the video. And the main reason why I'm sitting on this page is because what we have ended up having happen here is that a lot of these parties who claim to be part of the Moorish Science Temple or who claim to be Moorish, they have kind of made up their own rules. And I'm about to explain to you the reason why they feel that they can do that. But the Moorish leader that you see in this picture was someone who was sentenced to prison for tax fraud. We are seeing this type of thing more and more. And the reason behind this is because we have these groups who are getting together and they are doing largely what the sovereign citizen groups are doing. And that is claiming that you can file liens against people just because they make you upset. Or claiming that you can file a 1099 OID tax form and there won't be any repercussions for it, even though the refund you would receive would be proportionately much larger than what you deserved. These types of things are scams that run rampant in this particular movement. They also are the parties that you see quite frequently on the Van Balen channel and on the Scam Stingers channels, where they claim to be Moorish nationals and therefore they don't have to have a driver's license. They don't have to follow state regulations, and the cops and the judges have no jurisdiction over them, according to them. How did it lead to all of this? That's very important, and I'm about to get to that. As I said, I have a great surprise here, and that is that a party that is just absolutely brilliant, wrote an article that I'm going to be going over with you on actual sovereignty, on the American Indians' sovereignty, and how that plays into this. The person that you are looking at in this picture is named Shawano Chad Huron, a member of the White Earth Nation and a professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Washington. He received his PhD in anthropology, concentrating on native languages, and in 2012, the University of Iowa. He completed his undergraduate work at the University of Minnesota, and he currently resides in the state of Washington. I'm going to read you some information that Shawana wrote with regards to sovereignty. But before I do that, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the questions that have been asked of him. And this will hopefully help you all to understand what it is that certain groups are attempting to try to do in order to establish themselves, tribes. Why tribes exist today within the United States? The question is, what are Indian treaty rights? From 1778 to 1871, the United States' relations with individual American Indian nations indigenous to what is now the U.S. were defined and conducted largely through the treaty-making process. These contracts among nations recognize and establish unique sets of rights, beliefs, and conditions for the treaty-making tribes who agreed to cede of millions of acres of their homelands to the United States and accept its protection. Like other treaty obligations of the United States, Indian treaties are considered to be the supreme law of the land, and they are the foundation upon which federal Indian law and federal Indian trust relationship is based. Next, we have, what is the legal status of American Indian and Alaska Native tribes? Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution vests Congress, and by extension the executive and judicial branches of our government, with the authority to engage in relations with tribes, thereby firmly placing tribes within the constitutional fabric of our nation. When the governmental authority of tribes was first challenged in 1830s, U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Marshall articulated the fundamental principle that has guided the evolution of federal Indian law to the present, that tribes possess a nationhood status and retain inherent powers of self-government. Next, what is the federal Indian trust responsibility? The federal Indian trust responsibility is a legal obligation under which the United States has charged itself with moral obligations of the highest responsibility and trust toward Indian tribes. This obligation was first discussed by Chief Justice John Marshall in Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, 1831. Over the years, the trust doctrine has been at the center of numerous other Supreme Court cases, thus making it one of the most important principles in federal Indian law. The federal Indian trust responsibility is also a legally enforceable fiduciary obligation on the part of the United States to protect tribal treaty rights, lands, assets, and resources, as well as a duty to carry out the mandates of federal law with respect to American Indian and Alaska Native tribes and villages. In several cases discussing the trust responsibility, the Supreme Court has used language suggesting that it entails legal duties, moral obligations, and the fulfillment of understandings and expectations that have arisen over the entire course of the relationship between the United States and its federally recognized tribes. What is a federally recognized tribe? And this is where we need to start paying very close attention. A federally recognized tribe is an American Indian or Alaska Native tribal entity that is recognized as having a government-to-government relationship with the United States, with the responsibilities, powers, limitations, and obligations attached to that designation, and it's eligible for funding and services from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Furthermore, federally recognized tribes are recognized as possessing certain inherent rights of self-government, i.e., tribal sovereignty, and are entitled to receive certain federal benefits, services, and protections because of their special relationship with the United States. At present, there are 573 federally recognized American Indian and Alaskan Native tribes and villages. All right, so what is a federal Indian reservation? In the United States, there are three types of reserved federal lands: military, public, and Indian. A federal Indian reservation is an area of land reserved for tribe and tribes under treaty and other agreement with the United States, executive order or federal statute or administrative action as permanent tribal homelands, and where the federal government holds title to the land in trust on behalf of the tribe. Are there any other types of Indian lands? Yes, other types of Indian lands are allotted lands, which are remnants of reservations broken up during the federal allotment period of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Restricted status, also known as restricted fee, where title to the land is held by an individual Indian person or a tribe in which can only be alienated or encumbered by the owner with the approval of the Secretary of Interior because of limitations contained in the conveyance instrument pursuant to federal law, and state Indian reservations, which are lands held in trust by state for the Indian tribe. And does the United States still make treaties with Indian tribes? No. By reading this, I'm sure some of you have already figured out that with the groupings of individuals that we see that are popping up with their own postal courts, their own claim to fame of land because someone supposedly owns it, so they're going to turn it in to a community and do their own law of the land handbook, such as Cindy K. Courier has done. The Moorish Science Temple Moorish individuals that are actually African Americans are actually attempting to try to slide under someone else's treaty. This is what has happened. The bottom line is that the actual Moor people, the people that are of Berber descent that I was speaking of when we first looked at the Britannica article about the Moor people, those individuals are protected to some extent because they are considered a tribe. There are very few of those individuals that are actually here, and the tribal communities have already been established. The group of Moors that are actually African Americans that are attempting to try to hijack this specific name, the specific Indian tribal name of the Moors, are really doing a disservice to those individuals, which is the reason why if you speak to a real Moor, they get very irritated about this. But then in addition to that, it's complete and total disrespect to the Indian nations, but it's also complete and total disrespect to their own ancestors. I've already spoken to you some with regards to their claim that slavery didn't exist, or they're slavery deniers of some sort. This is just an unbelievable slap in the face to their own ancestors. It's an embarrassment, to be quite frank, and it's something that I think needs to be brought out into the light. If anybody who's watching this video begins to question Moorish descent and what it really means to be an American Indian, and by the way, that is the proper labeling. An American Indian, not a Native American, but an American Indian. They can contact the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. They can contact the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and they can contact the Bureau of Indian Education. See, one of the things that has not occurred, and I'm shocked by this, but through all the cons and all of the misinformation and all of the misleading of their followers, this group of people haven't been called out by anyone. Not anyone who actually knows what the truth is behind the tribal reservations and the actual treaties that exist today within the United States and the American Indians. It's a total and complete embarrassment and slap in the face in all directions. It's abhorrent and disgusting, in my opinion. And it's time that it stop. It's time that people recognize that the individuals who are using social media to push a particular political agenda are frauds. The following excerpt was written by a tribal cop, and this tells you some information with regards to the laws that are in the tribe community of Native American reservations and the federal government, and how the jurisdictions coincide with one another to some extent. It says, I was once a tribal cop, and this issue came up now and again. Each tribe sets the rules on how local and federal law enforcement operate on the reservation within limits. The FBI has exclusive jurisdiction for about 20 serious crimes on all Indian land, such as murder, rape, robbery, etc., and will come in and take over any investigation when and if those crimes happen to occur. Some tribes don't have their own law enforcement, and that means that the local sheriffs or police departments operate there as if the land wasn't a reservation at all. Others do have their own tribal police departments, still permit local law enforcement to operate business as usual where non-Indians share land and where those parties are concerned. What that means is that if you were born in Ohio and you have a birth certificate from Cleveland and you are on Indian reservation, guess what? The U.S. still has jurisdiction over you. If you were born on a reservation, then that might be up in the air unless you commit a serious violation where the FBI would step in. But even then, in most cases, the Native Americans will actually, or the American Indians rather, will actually push it through to the state courts generally. For example, the reservation where I worked had 2 state highways that passed through the reservation. These were patrolled by the State Highway Patrol and occasionally the local sheriff's office. The reservation overlaid 4 counties, so which sheriff's office might be there depended on where you were. If you were a non-Indian and stopped by the highway patrol on one of the state highways on the reservation, the stop would be handled as if it took place anywhere else within the United States, and the charge would be heard in state court. If the driver was an Indian, tribal law applied. The trooper could, at best, hold the driver and request a tribal police unit to respond. The tribal officer could then issue a citation on behalf of the trooper. In essence, the trooper would be making a citizen's arrest. The charge would be heard in tribal court. You see, the treaties allowed them to work together and still do. Something else these individuals don't actually realize is that there are BIA agents. I don't know whether or not it's something that they just haven't scrambled upon yet in their research, but let me inform them. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is an agency of the federal government of the United States within the U.S. Department of Interior. The BIA's responsibilities include providing health care to American Indians and Alaska Natives, but they also include some other things. See, The BIA has nationwide jurisdiction to enforce federal law relating to crimes committed under or involving Indian country, and officers are usually found near the various Indian reservations. BIA police officers may enforce tribal law if the tribe consents by deputizing the BIA and its officers. Now, what we're missing here in all of this, or what has been missing in terms of what it is that people do not understand that are a part of this Moorish cult, that are all over social media, that are spreading all kinds of lies, really, is that sovereignty doesn't mean what the definition states that it means in definition number 1 here. Supreme power or authority over the United States because you're going to claim that the United States is Morocco. That's not what it means. It's not even what it means for American Indians. You may have some form of sovereignty, which is the second definition, the authority of state to govern itself, okay? Or a self-governing state of being, definition number 3, which is what the American Indians have on reservations, but only to a point. Why? Because of the treaties that exist. And one of the things that these individuals like to talk about is the friendship treaty with Morocco. Now, I can go into all kinds of details, and it really doesn't matter what's factual or not, because they're going to come up with what they want to anyway. It really doesn't matter in this case. And I know that's a strange thing to hear me say, because my whole motto is the facts matter. And they do, but in this particular case, with what I'm about to speak of, we're going to set that aside, because it isn't going to matter what I say. I'm going to get slammed for this video regardless. These people don't like being exposed for the con artists that they are. They really honestly believe that they can accomplish this, even though the federal government will never view them as who they want to be viewed, because quite simply, they are not those people. And even if they were those people, the federal government isn't looking at the potential of recognizing any more Indian tribes. But this group of individuals believes that because of the treaty, that somehow Morocco became this land, and the United States is a corporation, which we know it's not. It goes on, and it's convoluted, and it's confusing, and it's that way on purpose. It's that way on purpose because the way that these groups get you is the same way that the sovereign citizens get you, the same way the patriot movement gets you. It's based upon a grouping of conspiracy theories, one interwound around another, wound around another, and it continues on this way until it has literally taken over great sections of social media and has pulled people in without them recognizing what's real and without them researching what's real. The real truth is that the Indian tribes that are reservations are already established. The tribes were here long before the federal government was. The treaties that exist were an agreement between those tribes and the federal government. And yes, some of those reservations choose to have their own tribal courts, and as a result, if you are a member of that tribe, and you are not a member and are on that land, then you could be facing one of those tribal courts. It does not give these individuals a right to think that they can go around creating their own tribal courts today and their own communities or quote-unquote reservations for themselves. Because if it's not federally recognized, as we have heard, the federal government will not recognize your laws. And as a result of that, you will still be under U.S. jurisdiction, as all of those that call themselves wrongly the Moors are now and will always be under federal jurisdiction, under the U.S. jurisdiction, and under the state's jurisdiction. So Wano, our professor, is going to break down in the following information I'm going to read to you sovereignty and explain its significance. I think this is important for everyone to hear. Please pay very close attention to the information that I just provided to you with regards to jurisdiction and the fact that there are no additional tribes that will be considered by the federal government. What is in place now is all that will ever be in place in terms of American Indian tribes. Please also notate that just because there is an American Indian code within the health departments that state MOORS does not mean you get to just claim that you are an American Indian Moor when you are clearly not. Whether or not you care for the fact that you have an African American heritage, or whether or not you subscribe to the fact that you did indeed have ancestors that may have been part of the slave trade. It doesn't really make a difference. History is what it is, and in this case, the facts absolutely matter. If you are an African American, you are an African American. And if you were born within a state, within the United States, and you were not born on an Indian reservation, you are an American. Period. Sovereignty is one of those terms we toss around without much thought. It is an important word within the contemporary American Indian discussions. The term itself draws from legal, cultural, political, and historical traditions, and these traditions are connected to both European as well as indigenous in complicated ways. A shared understanding of the term would be helpful to both local people working on their own issues and working with surrounding communities. Rather than defining sovereignty as a term, what I hope to do here is acknowledge aspects of sovereignty as have become sticking points as Indigenous people assert their own self-determination. I won't go into Indigenous philosophies about sovereignty because it's probably none of your business. Sovereignty is a type of political power, and it is exercised through some form of government. For the sake of simplicity, I will focus on the United States and its treaty federalism and the U.S. There are basically three types of sovereigns. Number 1, the U.S. federal government. Number 2, each one of the 50 state governments. And number 3, tribal governments. The U.S. federal government is sometimes called the supreme sovereign of the United States. Its powers are defined and limited by the U.S. Constitution. It represents the largest focus of political, economic, and legal power, and has some but not absolute power over other sovereigns within the United States. As a constitutional democracy, its power is supposed to come from the people, its citizens. The state governments derive much of their sovereign power from the U.S. federal government. The U.S. Constitution explicitly grants states residual powers. Those powers are not explicitly given to the federal government. The 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people." Tribes have sovereignty that is obviously older than the U.S. Constitution. Tribes had their own form of government and had many legal codes written into their own documents, their own stories, their own practices, their own memories. Tribal sovereignty is derived from the people, the land, and their relationships. Tribal sovereignty was not a gift from any external government. Tribal sovereignty is not defined in the U.S. Constitution, but anyone at all familiar with the history of U.S. Indian policy knows that many limitations, as well as possibilities for tribal sovereignty, have been defined over time. Tribal sovereignty is recognized in the U.S. Constitution Art, Article 6, Clause 2, sometimes called the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. It says, "The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made of pursuance thereof, and all treaties made of which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding." This clause is why American Indian treaties are so important to understanding sovereignty. Treaties are agreements made between sovereign entities, usually called nations. The U.S. has signed several hundred treaties with indigenous nations and other nations around the world. International relations occur through and are often defined by international treaties. Therefore, by signing a treaty, both sides are showing that they recognize the sovereignty of the other, and the treaty spells out how each nation will relate to the other as nations. The final thing that I would like to state with regards to this specific topic is this. We have groups of the quote-unquote Moorish individuals who will state that they have the right to do things. As a matter of fact, the only right recently. They are the only ones, they claim, to have the right to lean another party simply because that party has done something they do not like. But you see, when an American Indian from a reservation makes some form of a court transaction, it's done within the tribal courts. And if that party is within the reservation, it's recognized. But if that party is not within the reservation, if that party is someone who is outside of the reservation, and that American Indian attempts to try to file a suit against that person, it must be done within the U.S. jurisdiction where the party they're filing against is at. They don't get to file their own paperwork in our courts, okay? They don't get to file reservation paperwork in the U.S. jurisdiction because it won't be recognized. And the party that they're going after doesn't have to recognize it. Let me show this to you in real time. Imagine you get a payday loan, and that payday loan happens to come from a tribal reservation. It was ruled upon not very long ago, I believe it was 2012 or 2013, that the reservation was able to collect within the reservation's bounds. But the reservation was not able to come into the jurisdiction of the United States bounds to collect that debt, as they made the agreement with tribal documentation. So the tribes changed their payday loan regulations and laws to interact more closely with our own UCC regulations, so that this way they were able to go and file a lawsuit against the party who owed them if they defaulted. When you attempt to put a lien against someone in a false court that is not recognized at all, because the tribal courts are actually recognized within at least the reservation. But your groupings of individuals that are not organized really in any way don't make up a real tribe. They don't make up a reservation. And you are not federally recognized, and so therefore you really don't have any backing to support what you're trying to do. Not to mention the fact that it's highly unethical and extremely illegal in almost every single state within the nation. Moving forward from the liens, let's talk about the fact that there are financial scams that are going on like crazy with this group. There's the tax protester and tax fraud scams of the 1099 OID to attempt to try to get larger returns than what you're entitled to from the IRS. The IRS, a part of the United States, a part of what services the federal government. You know, the one you don't recognize. You make claims over and over again that you have the right to print up your own driver's licenses, even though the 10th Amendment clearly states that governing the roads is something that the states have been given jurisdiction over. And the states all say you must have driver's licenses. By the way, most of the Indian reservations that I'm aware of do too. You think having your own means that somehow that's a tribal thing, like a reservations tribe would be, and you should be able to provide that. But see, you're driving on state mandated highways. You're driving on state mandated roads that are not within any reservation. So guess what? That means the state has jurisdiction over you, and ultimately the federal government has jurisdiction also. Your argument doesn't hold any water, and it never will. And the reason that it never will is because the United States federal government is no longer accepting any more tribes as a federally recognized tribe. I hope this helps for everyone to understand better what it is that these individuals are actually attempting to try to do, because it doesn't stop with the Moorish. In closing, I would like to say that the Moorish Science Temple of America has been contacted. They've been contacted with regards to the Moors that make these claims that are very sovereign citizen-esque with regards to their financial scams and their expensive cards and all of the things that they spew all over social media. And even the Moorish Science Temple of America has said that they want nothing whatsoever to do with these people. So even they disagree with what it is that they're doing. Make no mistake, the Moorish Science Temple of America is a religious cult, and they have nothing whatsoever to do with the Moor people. Hope this helped everybody out, and I hope everybody has a great day. Please feel free to comment in the comment section. As long as it's a respectful comment, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you've got. Everybody take care and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.